skin, and we're going to basically do the skin lab. So I'm going to walk you through what you would learn in lab, and we're going to talk about using a skin model and also looking at some of the skin histology slides. So just pretend you're in lab, and I'm going to basically walk you through all the structures that you can find on the model, and then that's what you'll need to know for your exam. If you also look in your blackboard, there is a file. It says Skin Lab, and it's a PDF file, and it has some worksheets from the Skin Lab. It has all the structures named, and it kind of gives you a guide on what you need to know and how you spell them and things like that. So make sure that you download that PDF file so that you can have your Skin Lab worksheets as you learn the structures of the skin. I didn't have a labeled version of the model that we actually use in lab, but this is a model that I found online. It's real similar to the one that we use. So if you're kind of looking at this video today and you're trying to figure out how to spell some things, you haven't downloaded that sheet, then you can at least look at this and get an idea of how to spell things. So I've just kind of put it in here as a way for you to look and figure out how things are spelled. I'm going to go ahead and use the model that we're going to use. This is the one that you'll be tested on. So let me think the big screen. For some reason it's not wanting to do anything today. Okay, there we go. Alright, so this is the actual model that we have in lab, and if you've already watched the YouTube video, you saw Ms. Graham basically walk through these structures. So I'm going to do the same thing. It's basically the same thing that she did in the YouTube video, but I'm going to draw one here and hopefully help you identify these structures one more time, and then you'll be able to do it on your own and be ready for the exam. When you look at the skin model, what I want you to notice first of all is there's actually 3 different types of skin here. This says palm, or basically the sole of your foot. This says axilla, which is another fancy word for basically the hair that you would find in your armpit. And on this one it says scalp. So you have 3 different types of skin that are represented on this model. When we look at this model, you can divide those 3 representations into 2 types of skin. We have thick skin and we have thin skin. And maybe, without even saying so, you may have already figured this out from watching other videos or reading the chapter or just looking at this model. There's something that's very different between thick skin and thin skin. Number 1, you have this thick outer layer. It's really thick, and over here it's thin, so hence the name, thick and thin skin. The other thing you notice, in the thick skin, there's no hair. These are hair, right here and here and here. And you can see that hair is found in the armpit area, the axillary area, and in the scalp, but there's no hair in the palm or sole area, the thick skin, which makes sense because unless you're very, very different, you probably don't have hairy palms. Most of us don't have hair on the palms of our hands and feet. So anywhere else that you have hair is considered thin skin, and then your palms and the soles of your feet are thick skin. So what I'm going to do is just basically go through the different structures and make sure that you understand what you can find in thick skin, what you can find in thin skin, differences between axillary and scalp, and the difference between the 3 main layers of the skin. So when you look at the skin, you've learned what a tissue is, and basically you've learned what organs are. Well, skin's kind of like an organ, and basically it's made up of different types of tissues, and you have a layer that's made up of epithelial tissue, and then this layer here has got a lot of connective tissue. Okay? Now this top layer is called the epidermis. So where this epithelial layer is, this is the epidermis. Where this connective tissue is, this layer that's all pink, this is the dermis. And this layer below the dermis is where this yellow stuff is actually fat, adipose tissue, which is a type of connective tissue. This is the hypodermis. So you have the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. And I'm going to be erasing this as I go along because I've got a lot to write on this slide. When you look at this slide, you'll see in the epidermis, hang on, let me go back. Maybe trickier than I thought. In the epidermis, you have these different colored layers here, and then there's a layer here, 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 and here. Got this layer, 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 layer. These have names, and these are the layers of the epidermis. And you need to know these layers. You need to know the layers from the innermost layer to the outermost layer, because you'll have some kind of question on an exam where you're going to need to order these layers of the epidermis. All the layers start with the word stratum. So the stratum means layer. So the innermost layer, this layer here, is called the stratum basale. I'm just going to put S, basale. And you can just think about that as a base layer, and it's the base of the epidermis. Going out, the next layer, this big tan layer, is the stratum spinosum. This pink layer that goes all the way right here, this little bitty thin layer, this is the stratum granulosum. And then this outermost layer here, all this is called the stratum corneum. Now you notice there's a little thin white layer right here in the thick skin. That's the stratum lucidum. And the stratum lucidum is only found in the thick skin. So you have your stratum basale, the stratum spinosum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum corneum, and then in thick skin, a little thin layer called the stratum lucidum. Lucid means clear, basically, in the thick skin. You'll also notice in the thick skin you have a very, very large, really thick layer of stratum corneum, and in the thin skin you have a very thin layer. So in thin skin you have a thin stratum corneum, and in a thick layer you have a thick stratum corneum. Now this stratum corneum is comprised of dead skin cells, and you would expect to find thick skin where you tend to have a lot of friction, so that it's kind of protective. So think about the palms of your hand, if they're real protected, soles of your feet. I think girls think about in the wintertime when your feet dry out and you get those cracks in your heels. That's basically this dry skin and those dead skin cells just kind of cracking apart. But it acts to protect those parts of your body. So that's the layers of the epidermis. So from the stratum basale this way, all that is epidermis, and you need to know those 5 layers. Now this layer, all this pink stuff, this is the dermis. And you basically have this little papillary layer here. Where you have the little ridges going up and down. That's the papillary layer. Let me get rid of all that. Sorry guys, sometimes the technology just doesn't want to agree with me. You have the papillary layer, and then you have the reticular layer. This connective tissue inside the dermis is called dense, irregular connective tissue. And you can see the pattern is kind of going in all different directions. And that's kind of convenient because you have movement. Like think about your skin, it can kind of go in all different directions, so it's irregular. It doesn't have to just move in one direction. And then below in your hypodermis, all this yellow stuff, that is basically adipose tissue or fat, which acts to cushion and also to insulate. You'll also notice in the hypodermis, you've got your vessels, here's your veins, the blue things, and then you have these red things, and then you have the vessels will shoot off through the dermis, and then you will have some capillaries that kind of finger up into that papillary region. There's no blood in the epidermis. It's avascular. All your blood is in the dermis. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the structures that you find in each one of these types of skin. So let's start with the thick skin, and we're just going to go down. You've got your 5 layers of the epidermis. You've got your blood vessels, there's an artery, there's a vein, a little capillary. You've also got these white things. And you'll notice there's one here and one here. And these are eccrine or eccrine. I say eccrine so I can spell it. Eccrine sweat glands. And this is salty sweat. So if you've watched the video on skin, this is just your regular salty sweat. You know, when you're hot and you need to sweat, this is that kind of sweat. You have them on your palms, and think about when you have sweaty palms, that's that salty sweat. Let me go back to the three types of skin, and you'll see you have these eccrine sweat glands all throughout your body. So think about when you get hot, think about wherever you can sweat. Wherever you get sweaty, you have these eccrine sweat glands. You also have two types of nerve endings. You have a nerve ending here, and you have a nerve ending here. These little ones that are right up underneath the dermal layer are called Meissner's corpuscle. And these large ones down here in the right above the hypodermis are called Pacinian corpuscles. And these respond to pressure for touch. So your Meissner's are light touch. So think about like reading Braille. And your Pacinians are for deep touch or deep pressure. So it just barely takes a little bit of pressure, light, fine touch to stimulate these, and you can feel. Think about it's like I said, think about Braille. You can have fine discriminatory touch. And then you have these Pacinian pressure receptors or touch receptors. Somebody's coming in. Hang on a minute. Sorry about that. Have somebody come in. Okay, so where was I? So Pacinian corpuscles are for deep pressure, and Meissner's are for light pressure. Let's see, what else is on this model here? So we've got your eccrine sweat glands and your Meissner's corpuscles and your Pacinian corpuscles. So let's move on to the axillary area, which is the area under your armpits and also in your genital area. So anywhere that you think about puberty, wherever you think about development that goes on with puberty, this is the kind of stuff that's going on. That's not right. Puberty. There we go. Sorry, I can't spell. Okay, so puberty is when you go into puberty around adolescence, somewhere 13, 14, sometimes younger, you start to develop these glands, and these are called apocrine sweat glands. So where eccrine sweat glands were salty sweat, apocrine sweat glands are stinky sweat. So you think about it when you become 12, 13 years old and you get hot and you start to sweat and your arms, you go, whew, smell bad, you start to wear deodorant. That's because these glands have started to mature and they started to produce their sweat, which doesn't smell real well or real good. So what you notice is these apocrine sweat glands, they release their sweat, their substance, into the hair follicle. And so they're always going to be associated with the hair. So let's go back to the eccrine sweat glands. The eccrine sweat glands, they go straight to the surface. There's little pores on the top of the skin, and the sweat just goes right to the pore. There doesn't have to be a hair there for the eccrine sweat glands, for the eccrine sweat to get out. For apocrine sweat glands, they're always going to be associated with the hair, so the stinky sweat's made here, and it exits through the hair follicle and onto the skin. You notice there's no Meissner's corpuscles in this skin. You don't have discriminatory touch there, but you do have deep pressure touch. So you have your Pacinian corpuscles in the axillary area and in the genital area. Now the last type of thin skin is in the scalp. Again, you've got your epidermis and your dermis and your hypodermis. Got your papillary layer, you've got your dense irregular, everything's the same. You've got eccrine sweat glands because you sweat. Think about if you get really hot and your hair gets all wet and it's all sweaty. So you have your eccrine sweat glands. But you have an additional gland on your scalp, and these are your sebaceous glands. And they make that oil keeps your hair nice and soft, it gives you greasy hair. That's made in the sebaceous glands. And you can see it's also associated with a hair follicle. So it's going to be released into the hair follicle, and so it's going to help to lubricate and keep your hair nice and soft. There are no Meissner's corpuscles in the scalp, so there's no discriminatory touch, but again, you do have the Pacinian corpuscles. Another thing you'll notice is you have this muscle. And, excuse me, it actually is a muscle. It's called the erector muscle, and it's a smooth muscle, And it's what gives you goosebumps. When you get cold, that's actually going to contract. It's going to move the hair follicle and cause your hair to rise up on end. So if you're scared, you get goosebumps. You're cold and you get goosebumps. That's the erector pili muscle working. I'm not going to go into all the layers of the hair follicle. That's not something that we're going to test you on. But this, you can tell here, these are all the layers that are associated with the hair follicle. And they're similar to the types of layers that you find in the epidermis. Let's see, anything else? Oh, one more thing. Also, notice where you have hair on these hair follicles. Do you see these little nerve endings here, these little fine nerve endings? These nerve endings, they actually allow you to know if something's crawling on your skin. So we don't have the Pacini of the Mashburn corpuscles in this part of the body. Let me go back to my big slide of all the skin. We don't have I want to erase that, sorry. Here we go. We don't have the, I know you guys are going, okay. You don't have misers here. You have misers here and here for that discriminatory touch. But how would you know if something was lightly walking across your skin, like a bug? Or if you, how do you know that there's maybe a piece of material, or that you're wearing clothing? How do you know that that's on you? How do you feel that? Well, one of the ways you feel that are these little nerve endings. And so when something wiggles a hair or makes a hair wiggle, causes the hair to wiggle, causes the hair shaft to wiggle, and that sends a signal. So you know that it's bugs crawling on you as it's kind of crawling and moving those hairs, stimulating those nerve endings. So look at your chart and make sure that you can find all the structures and know what's different between thick skin and thin skin. Where you would find apocrine sweat glands, where you would find eccrine sweat glands, where you would find sebaceous glands, where you would expect to find Meissner's corpuscles, where you would expect to find Pacini corpuscles, and just practice with that. You can print off this model and without the labels on it and try to label it yourself, and that will help you learn it. All right, so let's talk about some of the histology. We kind of use the model. In labs, they actually take skin sections and look at them through the microscope to identify these skin layers histologically or through the microscope. And so this is basically a cross-section of thick skin. So think about on your palms or your soles. It's a really thick epidermis. And so this is the dermis layer here. All this pink stuff is the dermis. And then here, you're in epidermis. And we've got the layers labeled. You have your stratum basale, kind of a thin layer, then your stratum spinosum, a thin layer of stratum granulosum, really one layer thick of stratum lucidum, because this is thick skin. You wouldn't see that in thin skin. And then a really thick layer of stratum corneum. And I tell my students, it looks like onion skin. So if you see something on a slide and it looks kind of like onion skin, think about a purple onion and lots of layers, then you're looking at the epidermis of skin. That should kind of help you remember what it looks like. And then here is that papillary layer, and all this pink stuff, this is that dense, irregular connective tissue. Remember, an organ is going to be made up of multiple types of tissues. So we have epithelial tissue and connective tissue making up the skin. We also like to look at some of the structures in the skin. This is thin skin, and one of the reasons I know that is because this is a hair. And I told you we don't have hair on our palms of our hands or the soles of our feet. So if I see a hair, it must be thin skin. Now, I may not know if it's on the scalp or if it's on my body, but I know somewhere this is a hair on my body. This particular one is on the scalp, and so this is your hair going out. This is the epidermis, and then here is dermis. These little circles here, those are just some little blood vessels that they've kind of cut in cross-section. So you can see the key to knowing this thin skin, look for that hair. Oh, and you also notice the stratum corneum, it's not real thick. It's just a thin layer. It's not near as thick as the thick skin. Some additional structures that you can find if you're looking at a thin skin model. This is of the scalp. This is another kind of a more magnified version. This is not the hair. This is actually an erector pili muscle, which is that smooth muscle. But we know, if we can identify that as an erector pili muscle, we know that that's what gives us goosebumps. It's got to be moving a hair. So if you've got an erector pili muscle, there must be a hair there, right? So there's your hint that you're in thin skin again. Some other structures you can see. This is a cross section of the hair instead of, they basically just cut the hair in cross sections, so you're looking down on the hair. And what you see here, these are sebaceous glands. They look like a bunch of fried eggs. So if you see something on the slide that looks like a bunch of fried eggs stuck together and they're close to a hair, then you should guess sebaceous glands. Because remember, sebaceous glands release their oil into the hair shaft. And so if you see something that looks like fried eggs next to a hair, that's a sebaceous gland. This is adipose tissue. Looks like bubble wrap to me. So if you see something that looks like bubble wrap, you are in adipose tissue, which means you're in the hypodermis. We go back. On all this other stuff, this is just that dense, irregular connective tissue because you're in the dermal layer. Alright, we're still in the dermis, we're still in the scalp. Here's that erector pili muscle again, so you know there must be a hair nearby because erector pili muscles are found associated with a hair. Here are those fried eggs. So again, this is a sebaceous gland. Here's some adipose tissue here. And then this is dense, irregular connective tissue. Now this is a different kind of gland. Got all this dense irregular connective tissue, so we're in the dermis. You see some little adipose tissue, so the hypodermis is below it. But this doesn't quite look like fried eggs. This looks a little bit more like simple cuboidal epithelium, actually, to me. But you'll see there's these little circles, and this is basically where they've done a cross-section of an eccrine sweat gland. So if you see a bunch of circles, look like they've been cross-sectioned, those are the eccrine sweat gland. That's where an eccrine sweat gland has been cut, and you're seeing these little hollow tubes. Again, if it's a sebaceous gland, you're going to see that fried egg appearance. This slide shows them side by side. So here's the sebaceous gland, looks like little fried eggs. And then here are the little circles, and these are the eccrine sweat glands. If you see an eccrine sweat gland, a lot of times you may or may not see a hair there because remember, you can have eccrine sweat glands on your palm. So you can see an eccrine sweat gland in thick skin. These are some of those receptors that I talked about, the fascinian corpuscles. This is what they look like. If you can find them under a microscope, they just kind of look like little swirls, kind of like a little hurricane is what you're looking for. And it's basically the little nerve endings, the little corpuscle that allows you to feel deep pressure. Here's some more of that dense, irregular connective tissue, so you know you're in the dermis. Here's the epidermis. This is that stratum basale, and you can see the stratum corneum. So right below this, you can see epidermis, and you see dermis here. If you see something that looks kind of like a little swirly hurricane in this area, in this papillary area, that's the Meissners. That's the ones that are for light touch. You're going to see those right below the epidermis. Here's a blown up cross section of the hair. You can see here's the hair, here's the root here. So when you see this, this is a good question. Are you in thick skin or thin skin? Thin, because there's no hair in thick skin. You can also see adipose tissue. So as you're looking at these microscope slides, think about all the things I could potentially ask you. What kind of questions could I ask? I could say, name this structure. It's a hair. What type of skin are you in? You're in thin skin. What type of tissue is this? Well, the hairs go down into the dermis. That must be dense, irregular connective tissue. The hair root goes down to the hypodermis, and all this is adipose. So just as you look at these slides, think about what I could possibly ask you to identify on them. And I'm not going to ask you something that I haven't told you today. I've been pointing out everything as I've been going along. So watch this video again to pick up on little hints on what you need to study. Again, here is a hair, and this is a really cool one because you can see the sebaceous gland is actually right next to the hair, and there's the actual duct. Here's the fried eggs, and so it can release the oil right into the hair shaft. And then last but not least, if you take our models and flip them around on the back side, There is basically a schematic of what it would look like to do for a skin to burn, examples of the different types of burns. So if you've not watched that video, you might want to watch that first before you listen to me now. But if you have watched that video, then you have learned that when you talk about burns, you classify them in one of three categories, either first degree, second degree, or third degree. And basically what that means is if a first degree burn only affects the first layer, or the epidermis, a second degree burn goes into the dermis and the epidermis, and a third degree burn, there's damage in all three. So this model will show you a first degree burn, you have redness in the epidermis. Second degree burn, you can see the damage goes all the way down into the dermis, including some blistering, which is always a kind of a telltale hallmark of a second degree burn. And then a third degree burn, the epidermis is gone, the dermis is charred, and you have damage all the way down into the hypodermis. So you may see this slide again in asking you to identify the different types of burns. Okay, so that's it for the skin lab. Again, print off those worksheets to help you. It has all those structures listed that you're responsible for. Watch this video again. Look at your histology slides. If you have any questions, let me know. Good luck, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.